My name's Ron Armenta. I served as the Director of Youth and Children's Ministries here at St. Mark's in Fairfield, California. And I just want to say that this has been one of the best experiences in my life, serving God in this context. It is a challenging context, but it is also a beautiful context. We have a unique situation at St. Mark's, and the unique situation is when I came to St. Mark's, it was in 2009, and I walked into St. Mark's, and I had never experienced the amount of welcoming and love that St. Mark's has. The thing that struck me with this congregation here is that when I came in and when they did the sharing of the peace, everybody in the congregation gets out of their seat and welcomes you. Like it's not this shake to the right, to the left, behind, and front. It's everybody. It's like this big love fest. And when you're a visitor, that blows you away. If you have social anxiety, St. Mark's is challenging because people are going to hug you, people are going to shake your hand, and that's just the way it is. They don't care where you're from, they don't care who you are. That's just, and to be fair, they have a slogan here that says everyone is welcome, everyone's loved. They live that. It's not just some byline. So that blew me away. And then they have communion, and I'm not used to open table communion, and everyone's welcome to the table. I was challenged by that, but also moved by that. It like broke my heart open for this place. I was hooked after that. There wasn't anything within reason that I wouldn't do for St. Mark's at that moment. And it continued on, right? I had a discussion with the pastor about that, and I said, why do we do this? Why do you, what's the reason? I haven't seen it before, so I got to ask the question. And he said, okay, well, does a surgeon work on somebody that doesn't need anything? No, they have to have an injury. That's the point. He says, if you're lost and you're seeking God, why would I deny you the body of Christ? And I was like, oh, it changed my perspective of communion in that aspect, because there is an awkward thing that happens when you visit a church if you're not a member. They say, if you're a member, come up and commune with us. That's what a closed table is, right? And so you feel like, oh, I'm not included. There's a little bit of hurt that happens right there. And people aren't trying to hurt you, but it's just you feel left out. Whereas St. Mark's, that wasn't the case. I was like, oh, okay. And so we decided that this would be our home church, and we started coming. And then the next thing, I went to a barbecue, and they invited us to their church barbecue that Sunday. So the very next Sunday, I was at the church barbecue. This is my second visit to St. Mark's, and I'm sitting at the church barbecue at this beautiful place. And there's these guys talking about music, and I play a little bit of heavy metal guitar. I've been playing since I was 11. No worship music whatsoever ever in my life at that point. But I ran my mouth and said, "Oh, I play guitar too." Then the worship leader, his name was Dennis Sweeney. He's a former Marine, and so he goes, "All right, Air Force, put your money where your mouth is. I'll see you on Wednesday." He didn't even give me a chance to say no. He was just like, "Look, you're going to show up on Wednesday and show me what you got." And I was like, I don't play worship music. Just show up on Wednesday. And he like basically challenged me in front of all these people, and he knew that being military that was going to work, and it worked, because on Wednesday, sure enough, I showed up. He gave me music. He told me where to download it so I could listen to it, so I understood the rhythm of it. And I created this in iTunes. I created this thing called Sunday Worship. This is my playlist, and every song that we played, I would put in there, and I'd listen throughout the entire day. While I was driving, doing whatever at work, I was listening to all these songs. And then on Wednesday nights, we'd go to practice, and we'd practice the songs. And then that first Sunday was not very great, but for me, I made mistakes and stuff like that. But after that, each week, songs. Now that song, it's like 800 songs now. And so you figure I started in 2009 playing with the worship band, and I played all the way until this year, this month, actually, was the last time I played with the worship band. And so you don't think that you're going to have an 11-year career in worship music, as a volunteer when you step into a church the second Sunday that you're at the church. But that's what happened at St. Mark's. So they've always had this way about them. And so, we had a great director of youth and children's ministry. His name was Justin. And I wanted to work with the youth because in the military, I deal with folks when they get in trouble. And I wanted to get to them before that moment. And that was my motivation to want to be in youth ministry. I wanted to show them that they belong somewhere before they go out and do all these crazy things. And I said, well, if we can get them when they're still kids, then maybe that'll change their life. And so I showed up and I said, hey, I want to be a volunteer. And then, at this time, I'm a master sergeant in the United States Air Force. I'm used to leading hundreds and thousands of people. Not 100,000, but like from groups of like 300 to groups of, 1,200, folks. And what I say goes, and those people listen to me, kind of thing, right? Depending on where I was and what the job was, when I was deployed or whatever the case may be. And sometimes I led teams as small as 7, but I show up and he understands like where I'm coming from in the military. So he's like, I go, I'd like to volunteer for you. And he's like, I'll get back to you. So he shines me on for like 2 months and I keep coming back. I said, look, let me explain something to you. To be a leader, you have to be a good follower first. And I said, so let me explain to you that if you tell me to pick up trash and sweep the floor, and that's how I'm serving the youth, I will do that without question. I won't complain. That is what I will do. Just, I want you to see that whatever you tell me to do, you're in charge. You're the person, not me. So I will follow you as long as it's what God wants. And he's like, okay. So he said, well, we have family night and I need help tear down and set up. I said, sure, I'm there. So, I'm sweeping, cleaning, taking out trash, not one complaint from me. And he was like, wow, he was serious. Which leads me to a situation and a story that brings me to today. One night, family night in 2010, I was cleaning up as all the kids had gone, all the families had gone. My wife had taken our kids, our 2 older kids, home. And it's just me sweeping up and being a janitor, basically, right? So I cleaned up and have the trash. I'm taking it out to the dumpsters in the back. So when I come out of the door, I pass the courtyard, and I see this little kid, about 6 years old, kicking a soccer ball. This is 11 o'clock at night. It's dark. He's 6. I'm like, this is not okay. So something in me said, you can't just go throw the trash away. You got to talk to this kid. And so I put the bag down. I went over to the kid. I said, hey, how are you doing? What are you up to? I'm playing soccer. Where's your mommy and daddy? Oh, my mommy has to work. Oh, okay. Who's taking care of you? Well, my sister, but her boyfriend came and they kicked me out. And I was like, what? I was like, take my hand, take me to your house. I'm going to walk you over there. So he's kind of like looking at me and I'm like, no, I'm serious. Let's go, show me where you live and we'll take you back home. And so, eventually he takes my hand when we're about to cross the street. Before then, he's like keeping his distance and everything. But I grab him by the hand, we go across and I said, you lead me. Once I got across the street, I said, show me where you live. So he takes me to his house. I knock on the door. The big sister answers. And I'm like, hey, this little boy was playing in our courtyard at 11 at night. That's not okay. Well, I'm sorry that he trespassed. No, he's not trespassing. You can't kick this little boy out of his house because your boyfriend came over. And I gave her a big long speech, but after that I said, look, the next time I see this, if I see him out in front of your apartments at 11 o'clock at night with nobody out here, I'm going to call the police. So don't do it again. And so she got really upset with me and everything. And to this day, she doesn't like me. But I never saw him out there running around at 11 o'clock at night. his mom actually thanked me for that, and that was pretty cool. Because she came over to the church, because obviously the daughter explained it, because she knew, all right, I might get in trouble. They might, So she tried to forge that narrative, I think, for mom. Mom comes over, and I'm not there, but they want to get a hold of me. So Justin says, "Hey, can you come by? This mom wants to talk to you." I was like, "Okay." So I come by and we talk, and I explained to her what happened, and she was like, and she spoke Spanish, so I had to translate this in my broken Spanish to her, and she understood what I was saying, and she thanked me, and she said, "Thank you for looking out for her son," and that she has to work 2 shifts just to put food on the table, and it's very difficult, and she has to rely on the daughter to take care of her son, because the daughter's, at this time I think she was like 16, and so but I never saw him until we're going to fast forward here to 2015. Justin has left, and I'm the new youth director, and we're going to relaunch this elementary program called Genesis, and we put it out, and we had signs up and all kinds of stuff, and of course the kids across the street can see the signs. The first kid to come to Genesis was that little boy. So he comes and he brings all his rowdy friends, and it was very different from what the congregation was looking at. And these kids, come from backgrounds where some don't have parents, some are living with grandma, some are living with uncles, but they all have something in common. Somewhere along the line, someone told them they weren't worth anything, that they weren't going to be anybody, that they were just always going to be, like they always say, in the gutter. But that wasn't the case. I didn't believe that for a minute. I saw in them, these were children God created, they were masterpieces, and nobody can tell them that they're not worth anything. And so my heart broke for them. And those kids, along with this little boy, were the first kids that St. Mark's ever sent to Mount Cross, to the elementary school retreat. And they made an impact there too, because they were definitely different than the rest of the kids. I remember one of the things that blew me away was, when we had Genesis for them, youth, which is youth group, elementary youth group. They, we brought the food out, they would stuff it in their pockets, and because that probably the best thing they're going to eat that day. So I would like, there's plenty for you here. You don't have to hide it, stuff it, steal it. It's yours. So after we're done, if there's leftovers, you can take it home with you. You don't have to put it in your pockets. Pizza in your pockets isn't going to taste good anyways. But they were willing to stuff it in their jacket pockets. And over time, they realized this was theirs, and that stuff stopped, that kind of attitude. But the same thing happened when we took them to Mount Cross. They were putting stuff in their pockets for later on, and after that, during breakfast, and by lunch they were stuffed. By dinner they were like really stuffed, and then they, there was no stuffing food anywhere, because they're like, there's just too much food. There was snack, and they were just going crazy, just for camp food. And anybody who's gone to camp, like, I love camp food. I'm never a complainer about camp food, because I've had worse, way worse. Try eating an MRE; it's not great. So any warm food is better than what I've eaten. So I love camp food, and every time there's camp cooks, I always want to tell them thank you for the effort, because it takes effort to cook for all these people. But most people will complain about camp food, and these kids definitely did not. It was the best thing. They loved it, and so the folks at Mount Cross, they definitely do a great job feeding the kids, and it was the biggest thing. So when we did a thank you video for St. Mark's for sending them, what was your highlight? If you watch the video, almost every kid was like, the food. Thank you for the food. Thank you for, and that just puts it into perspective that they don't have some of the things that we take for granted. And so you have to look at them in a different light. You have to look at where they're coming from when they make decisions, when they make statements. It's from a place of want and need, not from a place of privilege. It's totally the opposite. And so they're the first group that goes to Mount Cross. They were the first group to go to the middle school retreat. and them along with the congregation kids were the first to go to the high school retreat. And so when you think about that 6-year-old boy next year is going to be a senior in high school. And it's hard to believe for me, but the point is there's so many of the kids in our youth group that share a similar story with him. And so what we're doing is here at St. Mark's, people have told them, not people at St. Mark's, but the world has told them that they're not worth anything, that they're throwaway, they were a mistake. And so it's our job at St. Mark's, our mission, to show them that someone loves them, that Jesus loves them, and that we love them and we support them. And you think about it, the thousands, and I do mean thousands of dollars over the years, maybe closer probably to tens of thousands of dollars that the congregation has poured into opportunities for these kids to go to camp, to go to the beach for the first time. Some kids had never even seen the ocean ever. And to be there, like I remember on that first Mount Cross trip, we had one of the kids from the congregation with us also. And we stopped at Santa Cruz, and this kid had been to Santa Cruz so many times. And so they're like, why do we got to be out here at the beach, blah, blah, blah. And, just kind of just ranting about it. And I pulled her aside and I was like, some of these kids have never seen the ocean. Don't ruin this first opportunity. Remember when you saw the ocean for the first time? And she's like, yeah, I remember it to this day. Let that happen for them too. And she just started to cry a little bit. And she goes, I was wrong, I'm sorry. And she's on Spizik now. So I just want you to know that young lady has had a life change and attitude change, and her heart is completely for these kids too. But she's one of the Spizik folks now from St. Mark's. But yeah, it was a perspective that she had to see. And when she realized that, she was like, we can stay here as long as we need to, because I want them to have this just like I did. And so yeah, that was definitely the beginning of that. Now, in all of that, it wasn't that easy. There was, even though that first day kids came over and we invited them inside and tried to get them, then the parents were like, what are these kids doing? And so the kids were telling them, hey, I was like, hey, the next week some kids didn't come. And I'm like, what's going on? And they're like, oh, their parents won't let them come. Well, I was like, did your parents let you come? No, I snuck out. I was like, you can't sneak out to go to church. I mean, you can, but let's not do that. So I went around door to door. I had all the kids take me door to door and talk to them. And some of them were like, well, I have time right now, and others were not. And so, I just decided that we would, set time for them and try to get. And they're like, well, you can come this time. We're serving dinner, and I'd bring food over, and we would sit in their living room and talk about what it is that we're doing here. And a lot of them were Catholic, and some were, Buddhist, and some were atheists, and some were. The map was everywhere. But when we sat down with them and talked to them, and showed them that what we were showing, what we're teaching, is the love of Christ, the gospel. So, like, even if you're Roman Catholic and you disagree with Protestants, you can't disagree on the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's just the unifying theme between anybody that calls himself Christian. We can talk about doctrine all day. Doctrine divides us. The dogma of being a Christian, that Jesus was fully man, he was fully God, that he lived on earth, he died, was buried, he rose from the dead. Those things, you can't not believe that and be Christian. You have to believe in the Trinity to be Christian. So, like, that's dogma in the sense of, whereas doctrine is, what do we think about communion? What do we think about baptism? What do we think about spiritual gifts? And those were the divisions that created the different denominations. And so I always call myself a disciple of Christ first, and whatever denomination that I'm serving in. I'll serve anywhere God leads me. It doesn't have to be Lutheran. It doesn't have to be Nazarene. It doesn't have to be Baptist. It's wherever. It can be anywhere. Because the one thing that I believe in is the gospel of Jesus Christ. And if we can't agree on the gospel of Jesus Christ, we can't call ourselves Christians. And so that when I talk to them about what I'm talking about. Everything that I was saying was things they believed. And then for those that were Buddhist, they were things that they had heard about this Jesus guy, and they're like, well, I'm all about you teaching my kids how to love people better. Even the atheist folks, like, I don't believe in God, but if you're going to teach my kids how to be better behaved and better people, I'm good with that. Go for it. They have nothing else. They're not doing anything positive right now. So if they're going to go over there and learn how to socially interact and do things better. And so that's how it started. And I had to actually go and sit down with folks in their houses and kitchens and say, I'm not here to brainwash your kid. I'm here to show them love and teach them, about the love of the world that happens because of this guy, Jesus Christ. And, and so that was a different conversation to have than I've ever had to have with congregational kids. So you have to get out of your comfort zone. You have to go step way out. You cannot do a diverse ministry without being 100% intentional. It doesn't happen on accident. It does not. You can't chance it. You can't, they'll maybe. No, you have to make a plan and say, we are going to take a stand in the community and be the heart of the community for this, whatever the ministry is. If you don't do that, it'll never happen. You have to devote time, you have to devote money, you have to devote effort to it. And it was challenging, even for St. Mark's, to do this. But when these kids do those thank you videos and they come up here on Sunday and talk about their experience, and these are kids that their parents have no connection to this congregation, yet these kids came to church on a Sunday to talk in front of a bunch of strangers about what God did for them. And they, the strangers in the congregation, we could call it the audience if we want, listening, they're seeing what their donation, what their generosity has given these kids. And that breaks their heart open too. And so it starts to happen. Over time, I've been asked, why are we dumping all this effort and money into these kids? Isn't this a drain on our ministry? Aren't we driving our ministry into the ground? Aren't we wasting our time? Aren't we wasting our money? And I said, you could look at it that way, but you could also look at it as, we always talk about the church sustaining beyond this generation. I was like, what we've seen at St. Mark's is kids that started out in the congregation at youth group, 16, 15 years old, go to college, find every chance to come back and be with the youth group as a leader, as a volunteer, as a chaperone, graduate from college, come back and want to be a leader. And today, my replacement is a 16-year-old girl who, when she came to St. Mark's, she was 16, a foster kid. A foster family brought her to the youth group. She eventually gets adopted by that foster family, by the way, but goes off to community college. Every day wants to be here with the youth. And so she went through a 6-week intensive youth training, youth leadership training. And it's 6 weeks on Saturdays for 8 hours each Saturday on purpose. A lot of people go, wow, that's intense. I was like, yes, it's meant to be, because I want people who are dedicated to these youth. I don't want people who just want a title or just want to check a box. I want folks that want to be here. And at the beginning of that class, we had like 10 people. At the end, there was 2 that graduated. And so those 2 stuck around. One of them was the first few chaperones that brought the kids to Mount Cross. And then the other, Sharon, she's gone on to, again, be a youth leader, a volunteer. She's been a youth leader for St. Mark's for 5 years now. And last week, she was hired as the director of youth and children's ministry at St. Mark's. When she was 16 years old, we never thought that investment would come in. She would become a leader in the church. That's the program. That's the payoff. If you're looking for the payoff, if you have to convince somebody of the payoff is that you are developing leaders that are going to bring your congregation into the future. Roland is our director of contemporary music, right? He's the contemporary music director. Sorry. He, again, not connected to the congregation, youth group kid, He went through a really bad stint. We literally had to respond to him when we wanted to end his life. And, Justin particularly was there, and I was there, to support him and things like that. And he came out of that. And, now he's in his 20s. And, obviously he made it through high school. And from kid from a broken home to contemporary service music director. That's what the program does. Not for every kid, but we have so many stories. We have a young lady who was an atheist. Parents are atheists. Both of them are scientists, but they're very loving and supporting of her. And she came to St. Mark's because it was her friends brought her. She loved it. She got a heart for it. We baptized her. She was on Spizik, and she worked very tirelessly and motivated St. Mark's kids to come to the retreats. And we saw a growth in our participation for Synod things, Synod. So we're talking bigger church. We're moving. These are kids that are thinking not just about themselves, but now they're thinking about, how do I reach more folks? How do I make an impact in the bigger church? No congregational tie. The day she was baptized, Mom and Dad came and watched and gave her big hugs afterwards. And then she went off to go to a Christian college, and where she's right now studying ministry. God does amazing things when we're intentional, when we listen to him and we take out all the barriers. Because there's a bunch of red tape we can throw in here to say, oh, well, what about this? What about that? Okay, step out in faith. That's what you got to do. If you don't do that, it'll never happen. It'll never materialize. There's nothing you can do that's going to make that change. And I remember a story that one of the youth brought up to me, and it was so funny because they said, I wanted to say, I was talking about Peter walking, stepping out of the boat and walking on water and then falling, and everybody talks about how his lack of faith. He goes, I don't want to like critique people, but I have a different perspective. And I was like, okay, sure. What is your perspective? He goes, why do we talk about his lack of faith? Well, because he sunk. He goes, that doesn't make any sense. I was like, how so? Now I'm like, okay, what is this kid where is he going with this? He says, what about the other 11 apostles? They never stepped out of the boat. They didn't show any faith. He showed faith enough to step out of the boat. Yes, he was afraid, and that's what he fell, but he took the first step. And this Peter guy, right, isn't he the one that he ends up calling the rock of the church? And I go, okay, you're right. You got to step out of the boat. I got it. That's a lesson I learned from my youth. And it's true. You got to step out of the boat, because otherwise you're not making that first step. So step out of the boat, step out of the boat. If you want youth ministry to be diverse, if you want outreach to work, you got to step out of the boat. You can't have the fear of what's going to happen. You can't have, how are people going to look at us? Or are they going to comment on how we're spending our money? How are they going to, all these things that people like to throw as barriers. They're not barriers. If you're intentional about it, they're not barriers. I have many times had to stand in front of the congregation and say what they're doing is changing their lives, and how, to remind them why they do what they do. And yet, I've never had someone after I've said that come back and say, I disagree with you. They're like moved because they see what's happening in these lives. And I don't understand how anybody can't do it. Like, it's organic to St. Mark's. It's not contrived. We just do it. Everybody asks me how we do it. To me here, this is not something special. This is not something that we, that we're leading edge, cutting edge, whatever you want to call it. This is just who we are. And so I have trouble like talking about it sometimes, because I'm like, well, we just do it. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. And so, but with maturity, I've learned that other congregations struggle with this, and I get it, and I know why. God put it in me to just go, and so I did. And so now when people ask me, I said, you got to be intentional. You got to throw away all the stereotypes, all the expectations. You can't go into this ministry expecting anything. You could pour all your love into these kids and they could reject it. That is the chance that we take. But that's not what happens. I mean, there will be some that reject it, but there will be, if you get one kid to believe, to follow Christ, to have a relationship with Christ, you are doing the Great Commission. Think about that. I mean, that's the whole thing. It's the Great Commission. How do we live it out in today's world? We got to take a chance. We got to step out of the boat. We got to be intentional. You know, when we talk about evangelism, and the kids struggle with evangelism, and I tell them, I'm like, evangelism isn't done on a table or a street corner with a bullhorn. That's not how evangelism works. That's not how Jesus did it. I said, think about how you came to know Jesus. And that's how evangelism works. And they're like, well, okay, what do you mean? I was like, Jesus addressed physical needs. You know, if you take the woman about to be stoned, right? We'll use her as an example. He writes in the sand, and he then addresses her spiritual need. But he develops rapport by standing up for her. So you have to have people won't hear your message if they don't think you're credible, if they don't have skin in what you say. So you have to create an environment by being the love of Christ in the world with somebody. They start to believe in you and want to know more about why you are the way you are. And then you share the gospel, because then they will receive it, hear it. Now, it's not our job to convert them. That's the Holy Spirit's job. But our job is to share. But when we share, if we want to be effective with the way we share, we have to establish rapport with the people we're sharing it with. They have to believe in us. There has to be something that makes them want to listen to us. And the way we do that is by showing the love of Christ to them. And so he establishes rapport with the lady. He addresses her physical need. She's about to be stoned. He writes on it. Now, everybody, like, the thing I always tell my youth about this story is everybody goes, oh, they were moved, so they left. No, they were waiting for the car crash, and it didn't happen, so they lost interest and walked away. And what I mean by that is, if anybody, when Jesus says, you without sin cast the first stone, everyone in the Jewish context knows that if you claim to be sinless, that's sacrilege, that is heresy, and you're going to get stoned. So they're waiting for that person to throw that first stone, because then everybody was going to stone that guy too. And it didn't happen. And all of a sudden, they get bored. One by one, they walk away, and Jesus asks, where are your accusers? They're not here. I don't accuse you either, right? Go and live a better life. That model works in today's world. When you see somebody that needs something, reach out to them. Help them. Show the love of Christ. And then one day, believe it or not, it may happen that very day, it may happen weeks down the road, they're going to like, why do you treat me the way you treat me? Why do you love me the way you do? And I always say this jokingly, let me tell you about my friend Jesus, but I don't say it that way when I'm telling them. But when I explain it, I'm like, let me tell you about my friend Jesus. And the point of it is, I tell this to my youth and my young adults, and they always chuckle, and they're like, yeah, whatever. But each one of them that has had an experience where they've been the love of Christ. People like one of the girls, she led a study group, and she was helping everybody out, and they're like, you're always like worried about us and not worried about you. How do you live that way? And the little ding in her head went, she heard ding. Oh, this is that time. And she shares the gospel with them, her relationship with Jesus, her story, how she was an atheist and came to find Christ, and it changed her world and changed her life. And she called me that evening, and she's like, you know how I made fun of you about this whole let me tell you about my friend Jesus? It just happened to me, and it was amazing. And I was like, but it wouldn't have happened if you didn't show the love of Christ first. And so many of my youth and young adults have called me and texted me and said, I had that moment, and I was able to share my relationship with Jesus with somebody, and it meant something to them. And so, that is how we do things. It's just who we are here. I don't know how to give you a step-by-step guide, but the thing is you have to have a heart for God. You have to have a heart for these youth. You have to be willing to say, these children are God's masterpiece. And because they're God's masterpiece, they're not flawed in the sense that they're throwaways or mistakes. We have kids that struggle with different things in our congregation, as in the ELCA, that are struggling with identity, gender roles, all these different things. And they come to me and they go, well, if God makes masterpieces, then why don't I feel like I'm supposed to feel? And I respond with this, and God is as wonderful He is, it's taken some maturity to understand, but this is the thing that I take away from this when I get asked this question. I go, if you look at the Mona Lisa, we would all agree that that's a masterpiece. Was it a masterpiece on the first stroke that was made, or on the final stroke? And that's the point. God created you as a masterpiece, but throughout your entire life, He's adding strokes until your final stroke is added. And when your final stroke is added, you go home. And so when I tell kids that, they go, oh, so I am a masterpiece. I'm not a mistake. I'm not a freak. I'm not messed up. No, you're who God made you, but God is continually making you. And when He's done, you get to come home. And we are all masterpieces. We're not mistakes. But again, you have to have that love. You have to have the love of Christ. You have to have intentionality. You have to take a leap of faith. You got to step out of the boat. I think that's it.